My name is Annie Gilson. I'm the Director of Creative Writing. This event tonight is a joint project by a number of professors in the College of Arts and Sciences who nominated a bunch of great students, and we wish we could have nominated more, but we had a limit of 15. These students have received fellowships from PEN America, and we have a representative from PEN America who flew in from New York City here with us, Donald Vincent. Thank you, Donald. We are going to, the format tonight is each of our panelists is going to speak for about 10 minutes about what they've seen in their work over the last year. And then they can, if they want to, I don't know if they'll want to, but if they have things to say to each other after hearing one another's presentations, we'll have a brief talk-back moment, say 10 minutes of that, and then we'll take Q&As from the audience, and we'll all get to talk. So we will start with Lisa. Please come on up, and thank you again for coming.
Like she said, I've been working with undocumented population for over the past decade, and it's something I feel very strongly about. So I work in southwest Detroit that most of you probably know as Mexican Town, which is a predominantly Hispanic population. And I'd say as a nurse practitioner, I really get to see people in their most intimate and vulnerable moments. For people who don't know what nurse practitioner does, very similar to when you go see the physician. I get to go one-on-one with people in the rooms, and they tell me their problems, and I try and help them. And it's all very confidential. And seeing this change in the last year, since the day of the inauguration last year, there definitely has been an uptick in a lot of stress and things like that. So just to give you a few examples, since the changes in immigration policy and since the election this last year, there's been several instances in Southwest Detroit that many people aren't aware of. For example, there are ICE agents who come and sit outside of schools as parents drop off their children. There was a Catholic church that's very popular down there, and our population is mostly Catholic, who the ICE agents sat outside of a mass as people were coming in out of church and started asking for documentation. And living in that type of environment, you can imagine how stressed you might be doing your simple day-to-day, taking care of your family, going to church and not knowing if you're going to come home, not knowing if you're going to be able to pick your kids up from school because somebody pulled you out of line when you're dropping them off. As a nurse practitioner, from a very medical, practical standpoint, there's been an incredible uptick in problems with anxiety and stress, increases in complaints such as acid reflux, which is very related to stress, depression, insomnia, those type of things. One story I like to pass on to share to give an example of this is I had a woman who's diabetic. She was a mother of 3. She's about 38. And she just stopped coming to her appointments. I hadn't seen her in months and months. And I was starting to feel very frustrated because she's going to get sick. So she comes in finally. Of course, all of her labs are not where they should be. And I'm going in there ready to scare her and say, okay, take your medicine. Why aren't you doing this? And one thing that the social workers actually that I work with taught us is when you have somebody that you want to understand better, you should always start with what's hardest for you. Instead of projecting your own beliefs and your own assumptions. What's the hardest thing for you? So I walked in and I said, tell me what is the hardest thing about taking care of your health for you right now? Why is this so hard? And she said, I'm terrified to leave my house. That every time she left the house, she would literally break out in sweats and start hyperventilating because she was afraid that she was going to get pulled over and deported. Her husband had already been deported, and she had 3 kids, and she was their only tie left here. And that, of course, changed our whole conversation and our whole dialogue of how do we help these people who are living in a situation like that. And for me, as a person who has grown up in a lot of privilege and not had to live like that, how do I show empathy and understand where those people are coming from? And how do we help them? And it's hard because a lot of times these people come in, they also don't have access to insurance, which is a big, big barrier for a lot of these people. And so how do we help them? Where are the resources? a lot of the resources that previously were there, especially from a medical standpoint, aren't there for undocumented immigrants anymore, and each day have been getting less and less. As you probably have heard with the CHIP program that's being debated right now, a lot of those kids who previously could get insurance, even if they were immigrants, are now being denied, and which is a huge deal. One other small vignette I share often is we had a patient who came in, he was constantly complaining of headaches. He'd been in multiple times, maybe 10 times, complaining of these headaches. And from our clinic, we are able to refer, but a lot of times the hospitals won't accept our referrals because, once again, these patients don't have insurance, and this is going to be on the hospital's dime. And so finally, this man went to the ER after about this, like the 5th time he had been to the ER, because nobody would pay attention to him, nobody would listen to him. And they finally did a CAT scan of his brain, and it showed that he had a terminal tumor in his brain that had been sitting on for months. And unfortunately, that man's passed away since. That is the type of thing that this isn't just about people being scared. This isn't just about people, wanting to work. This is also about people's life and death situations from where I stand. And it's tearing families apart. We have a lot of patients at my clinic, and also people that I work with, since most of our staff is Latino as well, whose spouse, one or the other, has been deported. And then the remaining spouse is left with a choice of, do they go so their family can be together, but they're left in a country that they don't know and they're not secure in, and they have a lot of their future that's not at play, or do they stay and risk everything so that their kid can have a future? And that's really what it comes down to for a lot of these people is their children, is a lot of those dreamers that we talk about, and how do you make that choice? It's an impossible choice for anybody who's a parent. Can only imagine having to choose whether to split up your family or not, and what the consequences of that might be. Does that sound good? All right, so thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Garrett, would you come up next?
Kind of, the reality is the law, I'm a lawyer, and as I said in the kind of informal introduction before most of the people arrived, I would probably say almost 90% of my clients are Spanish speakers. And so I've handled some of their kind of adjustment of status cases, some of their criminal cases, and mostly, they have their family law issues, whether they're child support or custody and divorces and name changes and all these random things that they need to deal with. And so there really hasn't been a change in the law in the last, I'm going to skip this, but, yeah, here. There hasn't really been a change in the law in the last year. Basically, what we had during the Obama administration, we had priorities of who was going to be targeted for apprehension and detention. And so all the kind of undocumented people were kind of classified as to who should be targeted for removal. The highest priority people were obviously the terrorists, the people engaged in espionage, the people caught at the border trying to enter the country, get convicted gang members, and felons. And those people, under that priority scheme, must have been, their priority was that they must be prioritized for removal. The next level of priority was the people who had 3 separate incidents of getting convicted of a misdemeanor. Or they would have been convicted of some kind of serious misdemeanor. Normally this is domestic violence. In my practice, it's normally domestic violence and drunk driving and some kinds of drug cases. Now, that includes also like paraphernalia. So if people have their marijuana paraphernalia, grinders, and all different things, that also counts as drug trafficking and drug related crimes. So when you're working on your projects, I would think you should need to keep in mind, like, when you hear people have some kind of drug conviction, it may not be exactly what you're imagining. And then also the people who kind of abuse the visa system. And the lowest level, that memo from Secretary Johnson from 2014, the lowest level was those ordered to be removed after January 1st, 2014. Now, in my own mind, you kind of imagine this, there's really 4 categories. Because then there's all the other people who are here, who haven't gotten in trouble, they don't have any criminal convictions, they are not ordered to be removed in that period, and those people were basically, for the most part, left alone. Now, with the election of Donald Trump at the beginning of last year, General Kelly is now the chief of staff, but at that time he was the Secretary for Homeland Security. He issued a memo directing the Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers. This was based on the executive order from the president that basically said the priorities for apprehension and detention is anyone who's been convicted of any sort of criminal offense. Anyone who has been charged with a crime, and that case is open or just kind of floating out there. Anyone that could have been charged with a crime, and obviously people who've engaged in different fraud, and or if in the judgment of the immigration officer they pose some kind of risk to public safety. And so this is really from my point of view, the major change in kind of the enforcement efforts that have gone on, like here in Oakland County in Southeast Michigan. It isn't that the law changed, it's like how the government decided to utilize their resources. Because the old the Obama kind of era, kind of 3 or 4 classification system, that was viewed as a kind of an exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Obviously, the prosecutor and the police doesn't go after every single case, and you make judgments. Now, I'm not going to say anything about border zones, but I think it is important. You may want to be aware that the state of Michigan is located within the border zone. In the 50s, this has never been litigated, this was never debated by Congress, it's kind of internal rules. The Department of Justice established that there's a 100-mile border zone where Customs and Border Patrol can kind of do things differently than they can in the interior of the country. They can have random checkpoints. I would say this about these there's allegations that they do roving patrols, and I say allegations because in the newspaper it's alleged. I can say I have had clients who have been detained, I would say, in this way. I think, Ms. Smith mentioned, it's like I've had immigration vehicles just driving by people's work sites, have sitting outside their workplaces, and then stopping and detaining the people afterward. I would also point out, because we live within the border zone, the Customs and Border Patrol can enter onto private property without a warrant within 25 miles of the border. And they also claim the authority to be able to use warrantless searches of cell phones and laptops at the ports of entry. And Detroit is a port of entry. And so you have to keep this in mind. And I just bring this up. By using this criteria of 100 miles of the border, this map illustrates the entire state of Michigan is within 100 miles of the border, because we also use the actual border and then the coastline nearest there too. Now, but for the most part, my clients and the people I work with, generally their encounter with law enforcement is with the sheriff's department or the police in the cities where they live. Now, Sheriff Bouchard is publicly stated they're not in the business of enforcing immigration law. They don't participate in sweeps and these kind of immigration enforcement efforts. However, I would say some officers do in fact inquire into the immigration status, how people arrived, and what their immigration situation is when they do have interactions. And I took a picture of this ticket as an example. It's not just me saying they do it. You can see this specific officer wrote that this individual was an illegal immigrant, and that's why he doesn't have a license. So obviously there was some interrogation as to how he entered the country. When I've seen tickets listing how long the person has been in the country. And so that happens. And some police departments are better and worse about that. There's some cities that I see they do this a lot, and others don't. Now, the other thing that really affects the people is the immigration detainers. This is a written request, basically to the sheriff's department from ICE, and we normally just call it an immigration hold. If I call the jail, I ask if there's an immigration hold, and they tell me. And this is a request that when the person, whenever it would be that they're supposed to be released, they be kept for 48 hours longer to give ICE the opportunity to come and pick them up if they want to. Now, it's 48 hours. I've had, in my own personal experience, I've had clients who are at the jail, should have been released. The 48 hours has passed. I had one, it was about 3 days past, and I finally went there personally to find out what was going on, why he hadn't been released from the jail, and what I felt had happened is given a lot of back and forth, and I sat around there for about 4 hours, only to discover that about 3 hours and 45 minutes into it, ICE came and took the guy. And then they came out to, the command officer came down to discuss that with me. And really the only remedy for that is to file a writ of habeas corpus. But now, the courts. And that might, the thing about the detainers, they might have been stopped, sometimes people are impounded, sometimes they're taken to the jail. Sometimes some judges send people to jail, mostly in Rochester, for nominal short periods of time, even on traffic-related cases. And so once they're in custody, they're fingerprinted, the information is sent to immigration, and then that triggers the detainer, and that kind of goes. Now, as far as the courts go, every court and by every court, every judge obviously has their own kind of attitudes and opinions about how this, their attitudes about this. For example, in Pontiac, I haven't had much experience of the judges wanting, for the most part, don't want to get into this. We do not want to know about their immigration status, advise them of because there's special advices of rights we have to give when it's a non-citizen, which we have to give to all non-citizens, whether they're legally here or not. But they don't want to get into it. Just give the advice of rights and leave it at that. Then there's other judges, primarily in Rochester, where they have an attitude that they're here to, I can't tell you what their attitude, I can see what I think their attitude is. Well, I've had conversations with some of them, so I, I do know some of their views. But they do, one of them specifically does think that she actually is in the business of enforcing immigration law. I argued with her and she said, no, we're going to have to disagree about that. So, and that means in those courts, on every case where the person is undocumented or have some immigration issue, they contact immigration. In probation officers, for example, in Pontiac, routinely don't make an issue of that. People are there to take care of whatever business they had, and then there's other courts where they do. Like, for example, in Rochester, in every case, they contact ICE. I had the kind of strange opportunity of being there once when they had a defendant who didn't speak English, and there was no interpreter available, and so I kind of interpreted for that probation meeting. And this is the only time I've ever done it. Attorneys don't participate in those meetings, and I was shocked that the probation officer, from my view, basically chewed the person out, threatened the person, terrorized, from my view, to cause them to be in fear, and told them that they're contacting ICE and what ICE could do to them. And so that happens too. Now, in some courts, as part of sometimes unrelated cases, and a lot of these cases, because the reality is there are some bad people, there are some criminals, and they need to be removed. And I'm not talking about those cases, because for the most part, I'm right in this moment, I'm talking about more generally traffic-related instances where it's like, there's no violence, there's no drugs, there's no alcohol, there was no assaults. These are sometimes even on those cases, sometimes the judges, as part of the sentencing, will order that the person go turn themselves into immigration. Sometimes they'll require the person bring in paperwork and documents before their sentencing showing that they've started some kind of process to fix their immigration situation, which oftentimes is utterly ridiculous since there is nothing they can do to regularize their status at this time. Now, and some they have also made them get letters from an immigration attorney saying that they're in some kind of process of fixing their status. Now, prosecutors, I would say, my experience of the kind of Oakland County prosecutors has been universally good. They haven't changed their approach or style. They haven't tried to humiliate anybody or make any kinds of strange scenes. City attorneys are as well. They're generally more kind of flexible and more open-minded, and all the people, the prosecutors I've personally dealt with, I've said, my view is they've had the utmost integrity, especially in this area. I made a few phone calls before I had this presentation to talk with a couple other attorneys and some of the interpreters. And we were just talking about, you know, we kind of talk shop. Oh, did you know what this person did and that person did? And I was a little surprised that sometimes, I guess some of the city attorneys don't behave the same way when I'm the attorney sitting there with, and sometimes when the defendants come unrepresented, they do chew them out and get on their case about their immigration situation. And the same is true with magistrates. Magistrates normally handle the arraignment. There are some magistrates you can go in, and there's kinds of tickets and things you can just go there and pay that day, and they allow it. There's others that won't allow you to just plead and pay, refers it to the judge, and then you get into this whole process of probation and ICE and all of that stuff. And then there's others where we'll set, like normally if I had you don't have your driver's license on your person. No, you forgot it at home or whatever. That's a misdemeanor, okay? And so sometimes people need to think, when we're talking about misdemeanors, like when you forget your driver's license at home, that's a misdemeanor, okay? So on a case like that, I've had the magistrate set a bond of like $900. The maximum fine for that is $500. And if they don't pay it right then, off to jail they go. And then what would happen? And when you can see, some judges also get really upset when you don't tell them that the defendant is undocumented, you don't tell them about their immigration status. My attitude has always been, it's my job not to tell law enforcement about uncharged federal crimes. Now there's some judges think that it is my job to come in and tell them about these things, and that sometimes becomes contentious. But I guess that's as much as I'd like to say about those kind of practical things. But I've had clients who have been picked up. I've had clients who I've contacted and discovered that they've returned to Mexico. They left the country. You ask them why. They just couldn't live with the fear anymore. They have kids. They pull their kids out of school in Rochester to go to some little town in Mexico. And so it has affected people a lot. And I personally had never once in my life seen a Customs and Border Patrol vehicle until this year. I was in Lake Orion, actually, and I saw them. I've never seen them. And so at the beginning of the year, my observation was they were more prevalently around. I think as soon as these new priorities came out, then they were out. And a lot of the immigrant people, they would kind of have an informal network. They'd send out snaps telling people where they were, put it on Facebook to alert people to be cautious and careful about things. And so that's kind of what I've observed in the last year or so. Like I said, but there hasn't been any law changes. This is all just kind of internal memos of how the policies are going to be implemented and how they're going to prioritize things.
Thank you so much. And that was a terrific distinction. I didn't realize that it's policy, not law, and how nuanced the changes can be There are changes, but not, as you say, legal changes. Thank you so much. Angela, please come on up.
Let's bring them out, bring their culture here. Just a brief bragging point about Pontiac High School. So I know Pontiac High School has a bad negative rap, but we have such a diverse culture there. So literally as a social worker, I was just gonna do one culture at a time. African American is the dominant culture, and then Hispanic, and then Caucasian, and then Hmong, and then we have some Syrian. I mean, we have a lot, so I was just trying to highlight it. Totally by accident did I get into the political realm of it. Just working on bringing them out. I thought they were just being shy, thinking, you know, we'll go to class, we'll go home, and not influence us with their lovely culture. So as I started working with them on the therapeutic piece, I don't like interpreters, so I'm an overachiever. So that's how I met Dr. Cecilia. I'm an overachiever, so I decided I wanted to learn Spanish. But as I'm talking to my students, I want to work with the parents, and I didn't want the interpreter there, so then they'll tell me what their goals are and where it got stuck, meaning this word called undocumented and DACA and DAPA. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was just really literally working with them to help them be successful in their life. So as they were sharing their stories of why, you know, what they were going to do once they ended high school, even if they decided to get through high school. So then it became the immigration piece. And then, of course, this year happened. And so our students are generally afraid, the parents are afraid. I want to work with them, and Miss Sonia will come up after me, so she'll have more information on this, but we try to work with them, especially the ones that are still learning English, and their parents. It's just such a hard thing to do with them being afraid to come out and share the beauty of their culture with us. I wrote this because I'm a social worker and I'll get out of hand. So the students just coming in, for them to know to be afraid to go outside, and those who are documented but their parents aren't, and they want to protect their parents, they want to interpret for their parents, be at appointments with their parents and help work to have money in the house, things like that. And then I started noticing that I also had students that were undocumented, but they're still coming to school. And then we get to this part of going to college and how it's going to be paid for. So in my walk with the students to get to this part, again, I was still just trying to bring up the cultures. I had met the deputy mayor of Pontiac, who's Hispanic, Latino. And so we were going to start working on some things as well. So now my target is switched to helping them to be comfortable and to work on DACA or documents or whatever we need to do. And one thing I didn't mention is I am also a therapist at Easter Seals, Michigan. So for the severely emotionally disturbed, so doing the mental health therapy piece as well. So we have quite a few consumers there that I want to work with, and I try to work with to keep them comfortable and to work on all of these things. So I've heard so many stories from the students of how their parents came over. I've learned so much about, they call it the coyote, which is, you know, much to my history in the African American, our Underground Railroads. So how they were telling me how they have the safe houses and the coyotes, and the children get left behind while the parents go to be safe. And it's just a very heartfelt plight that, you know, we're still dealing with as cultures just in general in America. And just to know that there's people who still will risk their lives to get here in a place where we totally take advantage of, because for a lack of a better, more eloquent word, we know we suck sometimes here. But we take advantage of it because we have what a lot of these other countries don't have. And so one student actually put it in perspective, and I was saying, oh my gosh, you're not afraid. What is making you want to come over here so bad? And she said, well, you have money here. And then my question, just out of total ignorance, was, is money, you know, worth your life? And she just plainly said, she was like, well, poverty or money? I think money. And so for me, being able to take advantage of what we have here, and I don't have money, but I have what they don't have. I have the freedom, I have the ability to make a lot of money, apparently. As a social worker, I don't really think that's true, but that's what I hear. So it just hurts my heart, and they have the passion, but just to even know someone that young knows their culture so well that they can tell you things. And so, not that it's about me, but even when I'm talking about my studies, trying to learn the culture and the language, they will tell me where to go, where not to go, what countries, what part of the countries. And it's just a beautiful thing to see that, and to see that they can't be here comfortably and get their education and then go further than high school because they're afraid and they don't have the financial means, and filling out FAFSA just scares them. It scares me for them because I'm paranoid a little bit too, thinking it's gonna flag for the parents, even if the child is legal. I just don't know what to do either. So all I can do is just keep not so blind anymore, walking into the law piece of it, or the legal piece, or the policy piece, and that's it.
Okay, Sonia, please.
I'm the ESL teacher, and I work with 8 tutors, which support the students in the general ed classes. So I'm responsible for the students with the English proficiency level 1. We have 2 and 3. And my goal, or the goal of the program, is to support these students and graduate as many as we can. So our goal is 100% graduation. Now, there are many obstacles that these students face when they come to high school. One of them is the language. That's the reason we are there, to support them. But also the economical reasons too. These parents, they come from parents that maybe one works, maybe none of them work. They have the problem of not having a stable home. Some of them don't live with the mother or the father, they are in the home country. So they face many challenges, and I give them credit for coming to school every single day, even despite the obstacles that they face. These families face many challenges, starting with transportation. I have a student that was sick with the flu for a week, and I go home and I said, so what happened? Why this student is not here in school? And she said, well, she's sick, I don't have medical insurance, and also I don't have a car, and I don't have a job. So we have a clinic in the school, but she didn't want to send the kid to school because she didn't want other kids to be sick, and the kid was sick too. So those are some of the challenges that we face. Another one is suddenly the father or the mother get in jail, so they don't really have not a stability in the home. They don't know what's going to happen with the father. Sometimes they move around with relatives. So I really give them credit for these students showing up every day despite that. Because when you go to high school, these adolescents face so many challenges, and besides that, they face the fact that they have the legal status here, that at any time any of the parents can be taken away. So that is really hard for them. So our job is to reaching out to these families and trying to provide support for them, so our students continue coming and our students are be able to graduate. So the challenges that we have is that when these students are undocumented, they don't see a way out. Why is it that I'm going to be graduating from high school when I don't have the chance to go to college, or maybe go to a training school or do something else after? So that the fact that they had DACA, we had so many students coming back to school, the fact because they had to be enrolled in a school to be able to qualify for the program. So now with this issue now, they don't see any purpose to come and graduate from high school when they know that they won't be able to get a driver license or driver's permit. They won't be able to maybe get a job or go to college. So the fact that what is going on with the political situation with DACA is really affecting our students. And hopefully we'll have good news soon for them. So our graduation rate has been increasing because we've been working really close with our families, trying to provide the support they need, and are going out of their way to see what the problems with the students. They need counseling. We have a social worker. We also have the Teen Health Center where our students that don't have insurance are able to go and get physicals. They get their vaccination shots. They are able to get counseling. So that is a big help for our students and the parents too, because a lot of them they can afford going to the doctor or so that clinic is really a very positive and important support for our families. So the team that we have at the high school, our responsibility is to try to graduate our high school students, and we have about 240, and I know that overall in the district we have about 1,500 students. So at the high school it's about 240, and my job and the job of the tutors that work with me is to try to graduate the students despite all the difficulties they face at home and in the school. So that's my job. And same as with Miss Angela.
Thank you. Thank you all. I don't know if any of you have comments for each other, because none of you knew what one another was going to say beforehand. So if you do, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to any of it. And not seeing anything. Okay, so then I would like to open up the floor, questions from the audience for any of the panelists.
The level of stress that these students are experiencing, is there any sort of fear or worry that this is eventually going to turn into trauma for them? Is this something that you guys are thinking about right now?
Yes. Yes. So on the therapeutic part, it already is for a lot of them, but they're doing good. Their coping skills are really well because they're protecting their family and everything, but the trauma piece is already coming out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. From a medical standpoint, like I was saying before, a lot of stress-related things have increased, not only in the young students, but in their other family members. And the other thing to remember with the Latino community, I'm sure you guys can attest to that, is mental health is kind of taboo. Very difficult to discuss and openly address, which is another barrier to getting them assistance. And one other thing, when you were talking about the coyotes, I know at the clinic that I work at, we have social workers, and one thing that we have experienced is stress from those people coming over. There's been statistics that somewhere roughly about 60% of women who cross over the border are sexually assaulted in some way, and that's a huge number. And that's usually in many ways in payment or just part of the process, and they accept that. And these are very young girls, and that has lasting lifelong effects, obviously, in their mental and physical health.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would just kind of echo that. I've heard from numerous clients, it's like that. The reality is, I can tell, many of them do. They have a great deal of anxiety and stress just because of the situation they have here. But we also have to remember that they had an extremely traumatic, and sometimes they were victims of crimes and sexually abused and assaulted in the process of getting here. And I don't think it's not uncommon. It's quite prevalent. I've heard it countless times. And it's something I don't think a lot of us even think about, how it came to be that some people are even here and why they're struggling with some of the issues they have.
A lot of the students don't want to talk about it. They prefer to be quiet. And I have a student that stopped coming to school for 2 weeks, and then we find out that he was really depressed, but he still doesn't want to talk about it. So these kids walk the hallways of the high school carrying a big load of so many issues, and despite that, they continue coming. I mean, they are fighters. They are very resilient. So.
I'll go to you next. You had your hand up?
Yeah, I have so many questions. I think I know a lot about this a little bit, but I just think it'd be important for everyone to understand the driver's license issue. And then another question is, there's the school buses. There's fathers being picked up at the school buses. What are the schools going to do anything about that? Or I mean, that's a bad thing to happen when you see your father
explain
taken
that?
away.
I don't think we're all aware.
Well,
of this.
their ICE stays at the school buses. There's been cases where they're sitting there, or the police, whatever. We're not sure how much Bashar is really supporting it or not supporting it, but there's fear of that. So, and if you want to go to Asa Latina YouTube, you'll see videos there that I have posted that shows a little girl who actually videotaped on their phone her father being taken away as she was taken to school. So with that situation, I just wonder if there's anything to be done with the school buses or some sort of support. And then also, I just wanted to mention to Garrett, if he could talk a little bit about the driver's license issue that we have in the state, where they cannot be given a driver's license.
I had 10 minutes. I had a slide prepared about the driver's license issue. I mean, I could. I don't know how exciting it is. But the reality is, most of us just don't have any experience with this kind of at all. When I was 16 or 14 and 9 months or whatever, you go get your permit, and that's that. Then when you have your hours, then you get your license. And so when I first started practicing, almost all my clients had valid driver's licenses. They had driver's licenses, they had insurance, they were not having the same kind of issues they have now. And in 2009, the Attorney General of Michigan issued an opinion saying that because of these people were not kind of legal residents, they're not really residents of the state of Michigan, they're not eligible to have a driver's license. So then in 2008, they stopped being able to get driver's licenses. And so there were people who, because they had them before, they hadn't expired yet. And so unless the person has the valid Social Security number, or they're a citizen, or they have they have their immigration paperwork showing that they're lawfully present in Michigan, they can't get a driver's license, when just a few years ago they could. In fact, this is just an anecdote, but I was standing in line to take care of my license, and I saw there was a young, I don't know where he was from, but he was a young Asian guy, I don't know, 18, 20 years old, and I saw that he had his paperwork with him. And I was just shocked that the Secretary of State, just the clerk, she probably didn't know exactly what she was doing, didn't let him get a license. And I didn't look through it, I was standing in line. But I mean, the people have a lot of difficulty getting their license, the tabs for their car, registering their vehicles. When they used to have, they still own their cars, and they still have to figure out how to title the vehicles. And so when DACA first came out in 2012, the Secretary of State wouldn't allow the DACA recipients to get their driver's licenses. There was some fighting back and forth, but then now they can do that. And so the issue is, for the purposes of kind of Michigan law, if a person has DACA, they're lawfully present within the state. And so they're entitled to get a driver's license, and they now have their driver's license, and then they can get insurance for their car. And I would say I could have a whole nother class about the lack of driver's license insurances and the impact on auto accident cases, these tort cases, these civil claims, and how that might be affecting people's insurance rates because caps are lifted and these different things. So there's a lot of consequences to this that people don't necessarily think of. And so if DACA, and I have clients whose DACA is expired now and they didn't renew and whatever. But if it is permanently gotten rid of and this isn't solved, these people's DACA status will be gone, and they then will not be able to have valid licenses here. And and this is a little thing you don't always think about. I had a client call once furious because they were at Myers, and they were probably 40 years old, and they weren't allowed to buy some beer, and felt like they were being discriminated against. But it's like, you don't have your ID, what are they going to do? And to say, I was with a client once at Bar Louie, of all places. I met them, and I didn't think, oh yeah, we'll have a drink, we'll talk about this, that, and the other, and then they refused to serve them because their ID was expired. And for me as a natural-born citizen, it never occurs to me, just the constant hassles because of this. Now, a law did come into effect last year. It was a Senate Bill 501. This part of the slide's a little old, but it came into effect in March of last year, which basically says that for people who aren't lawfully, your driver's license, because I have a ton of clients who have valid licenses from Mexico. There's a treaty between the United States and Mexico guaranteeing that their license is valid. And so if you're not allowed to be a resident here, you're still a resident there. So guess what? That license is valid. But you have to the person has to have an English translation of that license with them, and which I think is somewhat ridiculous, because all the information on Mexican licenses are in English and Spanish already, but that's the law. So, but the driver's license issue is huge. And this kind of is the cause for a lot of this contact with kind of law enforcement, because they're getting pulled over, and I've seen, I don't know how many, probably hundreds of tickets, license expired. How they know the driver had an expired driver's license as they drove by, I don't know. But, I'll have cases, sometimes you have a light out or whatever, but I've also seen cases where there are no issues besides the expired license too.
Don't leave. Stay there. Tell them about 4105B, that's being passed, and about racially profiling.
I have a slide about that too. But okay. I think Terry might bring it up because we happened to bump into each other at the hearing, now that I think about it. I was at the hearing. The people asked if I would want to testify. They didn't have me testify, but I was there. And so there's two bills. They're basically the same, equivalent. One's for the state government entities and one's for the counties and lower organizations. Basically, they say that I pulled out the main kind of teeth of the text, that the governing body of a local unit of government shall not enact or enforce any law, ordinance, or rule that limits or prohibits a peace officer, local official, officer, or employee of any unit of government from kind of limiting their contact and interaction with immigration enforcement kind of efforts. And the sanction for any unit of government that creates an internal policy that says, we're not going to inquire about people's immigration status and we're not going to pass it along to immigration, would be to withhold their funding from the state. The bill also would require officers to report people to ICE. And what was absolutely shocking at the hearing was, and again, you may not think about the consequences of it, but there was a representative who offered an amendment to say, the government employees who work for the schools or who work for the health clinic, they shouldn't be required to cooperate and provide information to immigration enforcement. Voted down. It was like the townships were like, we can't participate. There's too cost. It's like, well, we could talk more about that. But that is in the legislature currently, which would really change, because, obviously police need to be doing their jobs, but you have other employees, and that's why I put the text of the statute. It's not just about police officers and sheriff's deputies. This bill is targeted at employees of any unit of government, whether it's the school, the township, the health clinic, and all of these other areas, which would have profound effects.
Is this passed?
No, it's not passed. It's not yet.
Pending unless we make a change to
Yeah.
that. So it's up to us voting in the fall to make a change
Yeah.
through our government.
Yeah, I'd say look into it and see who's supporting it and whatnot.
What's the number one thing that a regular citizen or anybody in this room could do to help? Should they call their state congressman about these bills? What do you recommend would be the most impactful thing
Make
they
calls,
could do?
get involved with all the rallies that take place, join Indivisible, North Oakland. It's a very big group and there's an immigration group there. Join Michigan United. They need a lot of people to go out there and
So I'm
voice.
just going to reiterate. Join Indivisible.
North
Go
Oakland Indivisible.
North Oakland Indivisible, and what was it?
Michigan United.
And
There's a
Michigan
lot of
United.
help.
And an internet search can
Yeah,
bring
you can
people.
search them through Facebook, or if you
The-
want,
Just so you know, there's also a group called Grain. I don't know if there's anyone from Grain here.
I'm actually
The,
part of it.
you're part of Grain, okay. So they join Grain, the Greater Rochester Inclusion Network.
Yep. Greater Rochester Inclusion Network, which is reaching out to people of all different backgrounds. Yes.
One thing I think that would be probably especially helpful is, well, like for example, like this bill. Like these, a lot of people don't even know who their state house representative is. They don't pay attention to who that person is, what kind of bills they're supporting. They don't look at contact their state legislator in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, in the state Senate, and the same thing with this. I don't know how many people communicate to, say, Sheriff Bouchard's office about some things that the sheriff's office is doing. They don't necessarily pay attention to, it's not the topic for today, but it's like, there's sometimes local ordinances, your townships and your cities are also sometimes doing things that make people's life, this, besides just immigration stuff, but make people's lives difficult. If it's a lot of times these local officials are the ones who have the most impact on these people's lives, because the reality is, I don't know how, hundreds of cases, I don't know how many, I've never had ICE come to the hearing and take a guy from my hearing except one time. And that was this year. They came right to the courthouse, we got done with our hearing, turned around, and there they were. And they took him. But that is not routine. But what is routine is all the other issues that constantly happen that local officials are in charge of. It's like, do the judges in Rochester think everybody supports a really proactive, harsh approach to immigrant populations in Rochester? Maybe they do. Does everybody need to call them up and say, you know what, so-and-so, that's not what I'm on board with,
yeah, and get involved with campaigns. I'm now in a campaign for Alyssa Slotkin, plug here. She's running against Mike Bishop, who will not have a town hall. And he does not support anybody. And he's basically working on all these things that you've heard, 4105, all those, he supports those. And it's wrong. So if you don't speak up your voice, get involved. Hey, there's a 23-year-old that just became city council, and I think it was in Iowa or somewhere like that, Aurora, California. There's no reason why you can't consider even being a candidate and joining your own city council. Consider it. This is the time to
And just a question for all of you. Some of you have said that Latin American culture does not typically like to talk about mental illness or anything, and I've seen that because like they think certain things about therapy and everything like that. How do you break through? How do you break through to these kids?
Right now I have an easier role being in the high school because they get comfortable and they start trusting and knowing us. So they'll come through, but it's still a barrier because the students, like Ms. Sonia said, like pretty much all of us, they don't want to say what's going on at home, but they'll maybe start off, Miss Angela, I want to talk to you, but you can't say anything. And of course, legally and ethically, I can't promise them that, but I think in the school and working with them every day, we have a better we have a better chance at it. And then that's the part too, then we have to be able to try to get into the family, because not all of them, Michigan has a law that we can do a certain amount of sessions without parental consent, but it still doesn't bypass those things that we're mandated to report.
It's very hard for the kids to open up, especially when there's so much going on at home. But we try to reach out to the families. We call, and now we have a counselor that speaks Spanish, so she's able to reach out to these families and find out what's going on with them and how we can support them better.
I'd say where I work, we have group therapy sessions, which has been a huge impact, especially among the women. We have a program called La Vida, which is for victims of domestic violence at our clinic, which is also another impact that a lot of these women who are victims of domestic abuse can't come forward because of their legal status to get help. And so just being around other people who have had these same experiences and understand normalizing it and saying you're not alone within that culture has become a huge support. And so supporting the community and enabling people to come together and share their experiences, I think, is a big way to overcome that barrier.
You said that there's times when immigrants are in like a case or something, but they won't be given to ICE if they prove that they're in the process of changing their status, but you said that's impossible?
Don't recall everything that I just said, but I think what I was talking about is sometimes people kind of imagine like the government is one big thing and it's all kind of united and working together. In the reality, that's not the situation. So you might have somebody who, they did not have a driver's license with them when they were driving. They happened to do it on Rochester Road, and now they're there, and now they're put on a 1.5-year probation for not having a driver's license. Now, frankly, that would not happen to you or I. If it just wouldn't. I've never seen that happen to a, regular person such as myself. But if that happened to you or happened to some people, then they might say, well, I've seen, well, they took, oh, I'm not thinking, thinking of all stories now. But no, so then they meet with probation, and they basically, before they do an interview, then they need to come back to be sentenced. And they're told, before your sentencing, you have to come back with paperwork proving that you're fixing your immigration situation. You need to bring your whatever. Sometimes they tell them a letter from an attorney. Sometimes they want to see copies of the forms. Sometimes different things. And if they don't have it, they're going to basically be screwed over because they didn't do that. And I'm saying it's ridiculous, because if you have a person who doesn't qualify for DACA, they don't qualify for any change in their status. So to make a person do that doesn't make sense. And then when they come back, they're going to be in trouble. Or they bring blank forms, and it's like, why is this being done at all? Is that what you were asking me about?
I suppose. I guess I don't know very much about it, like what you need to do to become a citizen if you're an immigrant.
Well,
That's a whole nother conversation.
Even if so that's fine.
I think what you're trying to say is basically, if you're here already illegally, which may or may not have been your choice, especially for a lot of people that come as children, there really is no clear path to citizenship. The mere fact of your presence in this country makes you illegal. And so for you to go say, okay, now go show us how you're going to become legal, is like saying, okay, for somebody to come to me and say, okay, tell me how you're going to be 6 feet tall. Like, what do you want me to do about that? I think that's...
Yeah, okay, Christian. So, in speaking with other organizations that are trying to advocate for DACA, one of the things I know they're trying to do is screen for racial profiling. So, as a lawyer, how difficult is it to be able to, I guess, screen your cases for racial profiling? How hard is it in a court of law to prove racial profiling?
I would say probably pretty nearly, well, I would say, first of all, in my practice with dealing with people in this actual situation, that's generally not something they want to do. You know, it's like what the goal is to go in there and take care of this problem and leave that courthouse and go home safe. Not to litigate a case up to the Supreme Court to clarify some point, or to, you know, hold a trial about the stop. Like I was saying, like, so you were charged with an expired license. What you want to do is go there and pay and leave. You don't want the police looking into this. You don't want the prosecutor looking into this. You don't want the probation officer to be irritated. You don't want the judge to be irritated. So oftentimes the clients themselves are not open to litigating about issues that I can see that are issues. Because they're terribly afraid that what will happen if I fight this in that particular way. And it's like I was saying, it's like some of them, it's like, if I see a ticket and it's expired, and the only charge is that, I personally can figure out, well, you don't look through the glass of a window and see a person and know when their driver's license expired or when they had it. Same thing, it's like if two guys walk out of a little shop where they work, you don't drive by and know that they're some kind of immigrant or what their citizenship status is. You can't tell that based on anything other than what? Than just how they look. That's how it seems.
You mentioned you were Colombian and you came to America. You're now teaching English as a second language, but what systems were in place when you first came here?
What system?
To help you assimilate or just kind of blend with the culture.
Oh, I see. I always wanted to go to school, so when I came here, my goal was to learn English and make sure that I go to school. So now that I work with these students, I see myself reflected on that, and I really want them to succeed. So.
He wants to know what happened.
How did you immigrate? How did you get here and immigrate legally?
Oh, how I immigrate? My brother asked for the family, so the whole family immigrate. Yeah, he was in the Navy, and he one time sent a letter to my mother. I said, "You want to come here?" And my mother said, "Sure, we will go."
And how did he immigrate legally?
He came long time before, and he came as a tourist.
And he was able to become a
Was able to become a
permanent
U.S.
resident?
citizen. Yes.
I'm going to go to some else. There was another hand here, please.
What is happening if both parents are immigrants but the child is born here? Are there any situations of that?
I'm sure you guys see that a lot. I see a lot where I work. Typically what tends, and you can probably double check me on this, typically the mother's given priority. If they're minors, the father's deported, and then they'll let the mom stay if they're minors. And then like I was talking about before, the mom's kind of left with a horrible choice of, do you just leave your family split up so your kids can stay here for continuity and to give them education and those opportunities, or do you take your kids back to possibly a very unstable and unsafe environment? So that's been my experience of most of what I've seen. Is so there's a lot of broken families, and it's typically the fathers that get deported, unfortunately.
So yeah, so we have students that are born here, U.S. citizens, and live with relatives because mom and dad don't have papers. So it's a really heartbreaking situation because they are really not growing up with the parents, and we have issues of discipline and not be able to contact these families sometimes when we have issues, and it's a miracle that they come to school actually. No support really.
But in some sense, maybe the school is giving them an anchor. You all are providing them with the only stability they have in their lives, probably.
Yes.
And I could share, I do have a student who thought her parents would be deported, and they were making a plan that when she turns 18, she'll take the younger siblings instead of sending them back.
How do you mentally stay strong enough to continue to help in the face of these tragedies?
I don't. Yeah, go ahead. I feel like I keep talking, but It's not easy. Sometimes you take work. This is our jobs. This is the thing that we do 9 to 5 most days of the week. You take that home with you. I have my own family. I have my own children, and so it's hard not to project those issues and internalize them. But I think the main thing is to realize that if you can create a safe space for just one person, that is why I do what I do. That those few people that I get to see every day, that they come to me and they feel safe and that they can know that I'm there for them and I'm going to help them the best I can. That is reward enough to deal with all the other stress that comes along with it.
In our team, the tutors and I sometimes get together and discuss about so many issues that these students face, and our celebration is when we go to the graduation and we see so many students graduating. So we see the families, and we have a high percentage of our bilingual students graduating, higher than 90. So we're very proud. And that's the reason I get up every morning, 5:30 in the morning, is because I know that my team and I make a big difference in these kids' lives every day.
I'm going to say something a little different, I guess. I'm kind of, I guess, a big advocate of compartmentalizing. You know, you do what you can do, and you have to also recognize there's stuff you can't do anything about. And it's like the same, you know, when I go to the dentist, there's a huge difference between my toothache and how I experience it, and for the dentist who's trying to help me. And you know, and sometimes, you know, some of the people you really like, you know, it's like, and you have to kind of maintain the kind of idea that this is your professional role, and you know, and remember that you have your own life to live, and you're helping people in certain parameters, and that, you know, because the reality is, looking at Deb over here, who we know, like, some of the families are great and friendly. You could be friends with them. And some of them you don't want to be friends with, but they want to be friends with you, you know, and that people, they have a very different idea about, and I use the thing with the dentist. I have never texted my dentist. I've never called my dentist at weird hours every day, but they do, because the stuff happens in their life, and you know, they have a different approach to interacting with kind of professional services than, you know, than how, I would say, how people who grew up in Clarkston, where I grew up, generally do things. And so it's like you kind of have to compartmentalize just for your own sanity.
Sorry, coming face to face with such controversial issues, how would you guys advise us then to navigate, I guess, discussions with people of contradicting or differing views? Particularly, how do we then move forward in jump-starting like democratic debate with people who may not understand the hardships that these people face on a day-to-day basis?
Can I comment?
Nobody else is.
They're all looking at you.
Let's do the panels first.
Oh, okay.
So just, I mean, so I happen to be related to a lot of people who may not agree with a lot of what we're discussing about tonight, okay? And having those discussions, what's interesting is when we talk in broad general terms of policy and immigrants in general, people take on this side or that side. In my experience is when we talk about the human impact, and I say, this is a person I personally know, this is my patient, this is my friend, that this has happened to, this family got split apart and I'm watching the mom suffer through this. That's much more difficult to debate about, because that's a human experience that everybody who's ever been a part of a family, which is all of us, can relate to. And I think it's harder to get that into the debate sometimes because it's not based on numbers, it's not based on statistics. But the heart of it, I think that's where a lot of people that are probably here tonight, why you're here and interested in this subject, is because that's what pulls at our heartstrings, is these are real people. And if we can get other maybe people on opposite sides of the debate to come together and say, okay, yeah, we may not agree of how to do this, but we also want to take care of people. We don't want to hurt people. I think you have to find a common ground of that we're all human We all care about our families. We all care about our children, our futures. We all want security. And that's all it comes down to. That's why those people come here, fight to stay here.
Kind of dovetailing kind of what you're saying, I think, when we list, the reality is some of the rhetoric and conversation is so vitriolic and nasty about some of this stuff. It can be very easy to be really offended. And at the same time, I think we need to kind of remind ourselves that those people who disagree with us about whatever it is, those are people with values too. Like the issue is those people experience that kind of just kind of almost emotional reaction on an issue like this is because there's values that they're trying to protect as well. And ironically, sometimes they're the very same values that we have. It's like, well, why don't these people become citizens? They can't do it. I mean, I can just say they can't do it. They're not eligible. It's like they are upset because these people are not becoming citizens and doing what they think they're supposed to do. I happen to know that there's no way that they can do it, but they think that there is a way. And the reality is, because they think that there is a way, they're offended and upset. And the reality is, because they think there should be a way. So we really agree on some way, in a minimal way. And I think we need to learn to try to listen to what the value is that they're trying to express. But my experience is most of the issue of dealing with people is because they have just totally wrong idea about how this works, and they've followed their principles to the conclusion that's wrong because they didn't understand what the actual situation was. Well, why don't these people just buy their car insurance and do this and do that? Well, because the state took away their license. They used to do it, now they can't. They want to. You think they should, apparently. I think they should too. So you need to call up the legislature, get on the Secretary of State's case, and get them to change the rules.
Yeah, I was going to say for your question as well, education piece, which is pretty much what Garrett is talking. So even if you disagree, you will put that crystal out there and eventually it will grow because you're educating them. And like Garrett said, they don't know. And I, working with the school, have had to learn too, just because I have a good idea doesn't mean it's the idea. And for your question, I would take every last one of them home if I could. Had I been single and no children, like I thought that was my road in life, I would be in trouble because I would have every last one of them. But I do know how to compartmentalize.
Sonia, did you want to ask?
One thing that I was thinking is that people that are against DACA think that they're going to don't give these kids papers to be here legally, and as soon as they say this program is not approved, that these kids are going to turn around and go to their countries. They're not going to go because this is home for them. They came here when they were little. They're not going to turn around and go. They're going to stay, and they won't be able to contribute to the society the way they should if they have the papers. So those kids, really, for the benefit of the country, they should stay here and stay legally and have all the benefits and contribute, have business, go to school, and support their families too. Those kids are not going to turn around going to a country that is not their country. This is home for them. So.
And that's a great note for us to end on. This is home for them. And we are going to, all of us, have to continue to work on trying to keep that the reality, that this is home for them and that this is home for all of us. Thank you so much for coming. And